Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is one of those really strange Shabbat moments where I have been working for hours to try to get any recording that would work of the sermon that I wanted to give today. So I'm not going to stop this recording. I'm just going to talk through some of the underlying ideas because apparently I just can't put this one together. And every once in a while, when that's the case, the Baal Shem Tov used to talk about, I know when the Eternal is listening to my prayers because the prayers flow. And if this sermon isn't flowing, then maybe there's something missing in it, or there's maybe something that I'm trying to get at that I can't really find. Here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk through the life cycle events today, because there's a life cycle event that is seldom thought of. We think of birth, and we think of B'nai Mitzvah, we think of marriage, and we think of death. And what we tend to not think of is ordination. And the reason we don't think of ordination is because, well, isn't that reserved for rabbis and in some situations also cantors? And what I wanted to get into was a little bit of linguistic sort of stuff, and I'll try to do it right now because I think it's kind of important that ordination for a rabbi is called a smicha, and that comes from the Hebrew root that has to do with authorizing via leaning into something, the way that you might lean into a decision. Oftentimes this is encountered with hands, and when I was ordained, Walter Jacobs, the great rabbi from the States who was born in Germany, was on the Kindertransport, truly one of the great leaders and teachers I've ever met. He conferred in some very special way his authority on me. I'll probably pop the picture up there. He laid his hands on me and said the ancient words, Yoreh, Yoreh, Yadin, Yadin. But the other word that we have for ordination in our tradition is miluim, and that's in Parashat Tetzaveh this week. And miluim has more of an idea of fulfillment. It actually comes from the Hebrew word maleh, which means to be filled with, to be replete with. And we'll see maleh kavod, it's the heavens are filled with your glory. And here's where I was getting stuck. And maybe I just don't know how to get this idea across. So instead of a sermon, I'll just do this a little bit conversational for a second, and then I'll go off and spend Shabbat with my amazing partner. So the idea that I wanted to get at is, why is it that we don't think of ordination other than the fact that we usually associate with rabbis? And I think it's because we spend so long searching for meaning that we don't know how to celebrate that moment where what we're able to do and what we're trained to do comes together in a moment where we and everyone around us agrees that we are doing that thing. I think part of it's because we just have difficult ideas of what is fulfilling and what would fulfill us. I remember before I started even thinking of going to rabbinical school, one of the biggest compliments I had was one of my former supervisors, a really good corporate job that I had, who used to say that my job was being a cheerleader. What he meant was, and it was a type of ordination, actually. What he meant was that I felt that every time I came into the office at a conscious and unconscious level, it was my job to lift everyone's spirits. Maybe that seems silly, but it didn't seem silly to me. And so I would, in addition to sometimes getting my work done, I would go into everyone's office and say hi and just check on them. And it didn't have to be anything deep. Conversation didn't have to have great meaning. It was the energy that I brought in, and that was a type of miluim. That was a type of fulfillment that had nothing to do. The thing that was fulfilling me was not my job. I think I did that job pretty well. I was just discovering that I had ADHD and figuring out how to work with it, so I was more successful in that job than I had been in the past. But that recognition of someone else leaning into something that they had seen was something that gave meaning. But how interesting would it be if we as a community who spends so much time tearing each other down now, instead would spend a lot of time not getting into people's lives, not getting into the business, but lifting up what we see in others that we know is uplifting. See, the interesting thing about the Kohanim, the ordained priests in Tetzaveh this week, is that they had to be born for it, and then they had to be trained for it, and then that agreement came. I think that we get caught in one or the other of these aspects. We get caught on, what have I been born to do? Well, if someone was born to be a temple priest by the nature of their blood, but they never trained to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't care. They wanted to go out and be a herdsman. Then they could never be ordained for that thing. And by the same token, in our tradition, if you weren't Cohen, then you couldn't lead a temple ritual. At least that's how we have understood it as our narrative has come down. And how many of us want to do something, but we don't have the basic gifts for it. And society's not really willing to, with kindness and compassion, talk us through the idea that, no, if I'm tone deaf, I really shouldn't have the dream of becoming a professional singer. And that balance, that fine feel of life, of our responsibility to ourselves and our responsibility to others, feels like what's missing, and what I guess I was trying to say in a sermon that just wasn't working. And I don't know if this one is, but at least I've said a little bit more what I want to do. I guess we ask the first question, are we fulfilled right now? And if the answer is no, then the next question is, well, what are we seeking to fulfill us right now? Are we looking for a person to fulfill us? Because that will never happen. Humans, we're going to disappoint other human beings. And if we're waiting for that perfection that would fulfill us just perfectly, the "you complete me" of Jerry Maguire, it just doesn't exist. We hurt other people, so we have to find that fulfillment in and of ourselves. Or are we waiting for the right job to come about, right? We're in the middle of the Great Resignation. I myself have left working congregations to be writing and to be doing this right now. And as I went through this more conversational video right now, it strikes me that I'm lucky to have this smicha, because I can't imagine for the rest of my life being anything else than a rabbi. But part of why I've made the change is it's about my doing. And I think that I've lost touch with the miluim, that I've got the ordination. I've had a great human being agree that I should be doing this, and then other human beings. But I've still missed out on that, bringing the fullness of myself into it, that only lifts up. And so I guess that's the message for today. If we thought through the life cycle events and we left out ordination, maybe we need to engage a little bit more in this idea of what is it that we would need to say to others to help them understand how they're fulfilling us and how they're being fulfilled. Do we know how to communicate that? And do we know how to communicate and ask for others to communicate with us for the same thing? How beautiful it would be if we, just like we would expect to gather for a Brit Milah or Simchat Bat, or just like we would have the obligation to gather when, God forbid, someone has passed, if we could come together as communities in the same way and say, yeah, I agree with you that this is something that is fulfilling. What a powerful idea. Maybe that's a great place to leave it. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.